Now, this is what's happened in recent times, a weakening of the immune system in the West, and now slowly seeping into the eastern parts of the world, or the more primal, thank God, parts of the world. Prevalence of food allergy in preschool children is now as high as 10%. Matter of fact, that's an average. There's some communities, by the way, underprivileged communities in the United States, where the prevalence of asthma is 30 to 40% in certain areas where these kids don't have the resources and don't have buildings that are clean and environmentally safe. To give an example, that's Western numbers. But if you go, for instance, just to mainland China, where they're just starting the Industrial Revolution, just beginning to poison the public there, they only have about 2% of these allergy problems. I bet you the way it's going now, in one generation will be equal, then they'll supersede us. The number of new cases of type 1 diabetes in Finland per year is about 62.3 out of every 100,000, compared to Mexico, where it's 6.2, 10 times less, compared to Pakistan, where it's 0.5%. Now think about that. Now start to think of why this may be. Who strayed the furthest from the indigenous way that we lived? Let's raise our hand if you're in the West. Let's smile if you're anywhere else in the more primal parts of the world. So people closer to the earth, this is the first reflection you can make on this, are people who have a stronger immunity because they're not detached from what keeps us healthy. It gets that innate and adaptive immune system to have this fuel that it requires to be strong and macho. Now, this is another thing we've seen that's very frightening. It used to be few, but some young men in their early 20s, late teens, would come here with colitis and other gastrointestinal problems, pre-colitis, diverticulosis, diverticulitis, and now they're coming here at 9 and 10 years old with the same thing, and the numbers have quadrupled in the 50 years I've done my work. Now look at this. There can't be anything clearer than this. Western Europe, Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, they literally have double, 2 times more colitis problems than in Eastern Europe. Once again, the more chemistry, the more industry, the more electromagnetic frequencies, the more business we do, and the further we are from the earth, the higher incidence of colitis. So this is the first time you can reflect and actually see that this has a lot to do with bacteria, which we're going to get to shortly. In each of these disorders, either the immune system is overreaching, doing more than it should, to trigger, and pollens, peanuts, pollution, or it's attacking tissue it shouldn't do. Such a beta cell in the pancreas, in the case of type 1 diabetes, and in the intestines, inflammatory bowel disease. So now we understand that type 1 diabetes, which is much more difficult to deal with than type 2 is 100% correctable. Type 1 is not. About 3 out of 10 people have the potential, if they do everything right long enough, to eventually live without medicine. But 7 out of 10 will. And this really is, once again, a bacterial problem, and we're going to explain why in just a minute to you. These various disorders have one other thing in common. Their increasing incidence has occurred almost exclusively in developed and rapidly developed communities of the world. What does it look like when there's not enough information in the cell of our immune system to send the right message? So now we get back to the innate intelligence, the innate immune system. Isn't it amazing that our medical ancestors were actually wise enough to come up with that innate immunity, instinctual immunity? Now we're going to describe this in detail. If we don't have the exposure to nature, all of the things that we basically have lived with for the thousands of years that we've been in this form, Homo sapiens, and the millions of years that life had been on this planet Earth, we don't educate the cells. And the immune system cells without an education are like drunk guys running around on a Saturday night. They're not doing a good job, I can tell you that. They get exhausted rapidly, they're confused, and they create more havoc than they give help. So we have to get a little dirty, in plain English. We have to get down. You start to see countries that are very sterile, you see disease rates go up. Now we're going to show you a study that was done, the most remarkable study on this. They went out and got wild mice, not wild rice, wild mice. And the wild mice are on the soil and they're living out in nature and they're macho and they have little muscles and everything else. They're really cool little mice. And then they took the poor mice that they developed in places like the Jackson Laboratory. Most mice, research mice in the United States are up at Jackson in the northern part of Maine. And they looked at these. And look at what happens when they expose them to an infection. You're halfway down, if you look at the wild rice, you see the CD4 T cell activates and goes into the macrophages, or the DCSs, as we call them. And it starts to fight. Look at what happens with the poor little sterilized mouse that was actually laboratory created. That T cell doesn't know what to do. And it ends up with what we call, listen to this, clinically, I'm going to repeat this twice, immunopathology death. Immunopathology death. Write that down. I want you to remember it, because most people on earth today are dying from immunopathology death. Pretty important stuff. T and B cell leukocytes of the adaptive immune system, remember adaptive is number 2 system, use a long-term memory of previously encountered pathogens. So they're like these brilliant little computers that say, hey, I've fought that pathogen before. I know what to do. I know how to trick them. I know how we beat them in the past. Isn't that great? These lymphocytes, however, cannot reliably distinguish self from non-self. They don't know which one is good, which one is bad. And so they rely on the innate immune system for instruction on when and how to respond to the infection. Now, what about if the innate immune system is drunk and it's Saturday night and they're falling all over the place and they don't know what to do and they're fumbling and they're confused? Well, there's nobody there to tell the adaptive immune system, go after these guys. And this is where really, really, really deep disease comes from and death comes from. I'm going to give you some scenarios here. The approaching storm. Man, is that storm coming close? Because people are sicker today than they've ever been, and you're being told we live longer than we've ever lived. Lie, 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 lie. And we're going to get to that in just a minute with you. So the cytokine storms. Now, these cytokines in the body are really important for you. You don't have them, kaput, finito. Cytokine storm and cytokine release syndrome. That's a better way to describe it. Remember, the cytokine release syndrome are life-threatening systemic inflammatory syndromes involving elevated levels of circulating cytokines and immune cell hyperactivation, more than they should be, hyperactivation that can be triggered by various therapies, pathogens, cancers, autoimmune conditions, and monogenous disorders. So what does that mean? All of the bad things we're doing to ourselves get these cytokines that have a really important job to keep you healthy, to fight the bad guys, to go completely out of their mind, crazy. They're running around and they start to attack you. So the cytokine is supposed to be attacking the bad guys because the drunk guy is not telling them, hey, go out and get this, that's the bad guy. They're actually attacking your body. And this is a problem. Now, this is what it looks like. Under normal conditions, you look there to the right part of your screen, normal conditions, this is what happens. The cytokines release, the active immune system says, here's what we need, here's how much ammunition we're going to take. They take that cytokine ammunition and kill the bad guys. The active immune system, when you have healthy cells with a cytokine storm, look at how much different it is. It can be up to 2,000 times more from what science journals are telling us now. So what happens if you have up to 2,000 times, let's say 1,000 times, let's say 500 times, let's say 100 times more cytokines doing the job? Well, they're out. They have one objective, to get something. And they're going to get good guys